on the lid of a casket that I knew for a fact was completely empty, and as the military honor guard folded the flag with such solemn precision, all I could think about was the look on my wife's face when she realized her dead husband was standing right behind her at the wake. You ever wonder how far someone can be pushed before they decide to burn every bridge, every lie, and every backstabber to the ground? I'm sitting here now, safe, but with the ruins of my old life behind me, and I have to ask you straight up, if you found out your entire world was a carefully constructed lie designed to bleed you dry while you were overseas serving your country, would you have the restraint to play the long game, or would you have lost it right then and there? I need you to tell me if I went too far, because what I'm about to tell you is how I used my own death to catch the people I loved most in the ultimate act of betrayal. My name is David, and for 12 years I was the guy who did everything by the book. I was a Chief Warrant Officer, spent more time in the sand and dirt of places I can't even pronounce than I did in my own living room, and I did it all for Sarah. Sarah was my high school sweetheart, the woman I thought was my bedrock. We had a beautiful home in a quiet suburb, a daughter named Mia who was the light of my life, and a life that looked perfect on paper. I sent every extra cent of my hazard pay home. I lived like a monk on deployments, saving every dime so Sarah could have the best of everything, so Mia could go to the best private schools, and so we'd have a massive nest egg when I finally hung up the uniform. I trusted her with everything, the bank accounts, the properties, my soul. But the thing about being gone for 18 months at a time is that you start to become a ghost in your own home even before you're actually dead. It started with the small things, like the way her stories didn't quite line up during our weekly satellite calls. She'd mention being at her sister's house, but I'd hear the distinct chime of a doorbell that didn't sound like her sister's. Then there were the emergencies, the car needing a $5,000 transmission, the roof suddenly leaking, the investments that took a hit. I never questioned it because I was 5,000 miles away, and I felt guilty for not being there to fix it myself. I just told her to take the money and handle it. I was a provider. That was my job. Everything changed during my last tour. We were conducting a high-value target extraction when our transport was hit by an ID. It was a mess, smoke, fire, and total chaos. I was thrown clear, but in the heat of the extraction, the manifest got scrambled. 2 of my brothers didn't make it, and for 72 hours, I was listed as MIA, presumed dead. I was actually in a local clinic with a concussion and a fractured leg, but the communications were down. When I finally got back to a secure base and saw the report, I was about to call home and tell Sarah I was alive, but something stopped me. I had this nagging feeling in my gut, a soldier's intuition. I decided to check my personal accounts first, the ones I kept as a backup. I saw that within 4 hours of the presumed dead notification reaching Sarah, she had already initiated a massive transfer of funds. She wasn't grieving, she was liquidating. I felt a coldness in my chest that I'd never felt in combat. I contacted a trusted friend in intelligence, a guy who owed me his life, and I asked him to keep my status undetermined for just a little longer while I did some digging. What he found broke me. My best friend and business partner, Mark, had been living in my house for 6 months. They hadn't even been subtle about it. My daughter was being told that Uncle Mark was going to be her new daddy because I was never coming home. They were planning to use my life insurance pay out a cool $1 million to buy a villa in Spain and leave everything behind. They weren't just waiting for me to die, they were celebrating it. I spent the next 2 weeks as a dead man walking. I coordinated with my CO, who was a man of immense integrity and hated a traitor as much as I did. He helped me facilitate a closed casket, return for my remains, which were, of course, just sandbags and old gear. I arrived back in the States under a different name, staying in a cheap motel and watching my own life from the shadows. I watched Mark driving my truck. I watched them laughing on the porch of the house I paid for, drinking the expensive scotch I'd been saving for my homecoming. I saw Sarah looking at brochures for overseas properties while wearing the widow black that she'd probably bought weeks before the ID even went off. The betrayal was so deep it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I realized then that a quick confrontation wasn't enough. They wanted my life. Fine. I would let them see exactly what they were throwing away. I waited until the day of the wake. I waited until the room was full of our friends, our family, and the military community that respected me. I watched from the back of the funeral home, wearing a heavy coat and a hat, seeing Mark put his arm around my wife while she gave a tearful, fake speech about my sacrifice. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I was standing in the shadows of my own funeral, watching the person I loved most cry crocodile tears over an empty box while my best friend held her hand. I had the evidence of their fraud, their affair, and their plan to steal my daughter away to another country. Before I tell you how I walked into that room and what happened when the ghost finally spoke, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have called the cops? Would you have just walked away and started over? Or would you have done what I did and made sure they never forgot the day the dead came back for what was theirs? Let me know, because I really need to know if I'm the villain in this story or just a father who was finished being a victim. I waited for the moment of silence at the end of Sarah's eulogy. The room was deathly quiet, the only sound being her soft, practiced sobbing into a lace handkerchief. I stepped out from the shadows and walked slowly down the center aisle. The floorboards creaked under my boots, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot. People started to turn. At first, there was confusion. Then, a collective gasp that felt like the air being sucked out of the room. Sarah looked up, her eyes red, and when she saw me, her face went from a pale white to a sickly gray. She dropped the handkerchief. Mark stood up, his jaw hitting the floor, his hands trembling so hard he knocked over a vase of lilies. I didn't say a word at first. I just walked up to the casket, placed my hand on the wood, and looked Sarah dead in the eye. I told her, "You missed a spot on your mourning outfit, Sarah. You're still wearing the diamond earrings Mark bought you with my deployment pay." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the screaming started. Sarah tried to claim it was a miracle, that she was so happy I was alive, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned to the crowd, many of whom were my fellow soldiers, and I pulled out a thick envelope. I laid out the bank statements, the photos of Mark moving into my house while I was still on mission, and the flight itineraries to Spain they had booked for the day after the insurance check was supposed to clear. The military police were waiting outside. See, Sarah and Mark hadn't just betrayed me. They'd committed major insurance fraud and several counts of conspiracy. Because I was dead, they had signed legal documents under penalty of perjury that were demonstrably false. Mark tried to run, but two of my buddies from the unit were standing by the exit. They didn't even have to touch him. They just blocked the door, and the look in their eyes was enough to make him collapse into a chair, blubbering like a child. I watched as the local police, who I'd tipped off an hour prior, walked in and handcuffed my wife in her funeral dress. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I just felt a profound sense of relief that the lie was over. The aftermath was a whirlwind. I got full custody of Mia, who was confused but so incredibly happy to see me. It took months of therapy for both of us to process the fact that her mother was willing to erase me for a paycheck. Sarah and Mark are currently serving time for fraud and embezzlement, and the civil suit I filed stripped them of every single asset they tried to steal. I sold the house, moved to a different state, and started over. I kept the flag the honor guard gave me, though. It's a reminder that even when your world gets blown up, you can still find a way to stand back up. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that day at the funeral home. Some people told me it was cruel to let them think I was dead for those weeks, that I put my family through unnecessary grief. But when I look at the evidence of what they were planning, I know I just gave them the rope to hang themselves with. I learned that loyalty isn't something you can buy with a paycheck or a big house. It's something that's tested when the world thinks you have nothing left to give. My enemies thought I was finished, but they forgot one thing. A soldier doesn't stop fighting just because the lights go out. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by exposing them the way I did, and subscribe for more stories about people